Okay, Hadi.
Hi, hello everyone. Good day. Welcome to the Geoscience and GeoEnergy webinar of 29th of July 2021. Sebastian and myself are pleased and delighted to host our colleague Alexander Richter today to give a lecture about geothermal energy. I'll read a few lines about him and then we will start the lecture. Alex is the managing director of the Renewable Energy Cluster of Iceland and Iceland Geothermal. A lawyer by profession, he is also founder and editor of Think GeoEnergy, the leading online news and market intelligence platform for the global geothermal energy industry. For the past 15 years, he has been a major spokesperson for geothermal energy globally, and also a consultant on market intelligence, business development, and a strategy about it. Alex is a board member and former president of the International Geothermal Association, IGA, and a board member of the Canadian Geothermal Energy Association, too, which is called CanGEA. It's our true pleasure and honor to host you, Alex, today. Thank you for graciously accepting our invitation. We are all looking forward to hearing your lecture. To the audience, please note, Alex's lecture would last for about half an hour, followed by questions and discussions. Like always, please do type in your questions and comments in the chat box, and Sebastian will go through them and lead the discussion session. Please note, do not wait until Alex's lecture to finish and post your question. Please do type in your questions whenever appropriate. Your question can trigger other questions by the other audience as well. So, Alex, without any further ado, the stage is all yours, and we are very much looking forward to hearing your lecture today. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be part of your webinar series, and very pleased to give a bit of a view on the geothermal sector and the current update, and also targeting a little bit, and that's actually the title of the presentation, was to look into the role of geothermal energy in the global energy transition. And with that, I just want to start with one statement that carried through basically all my years in the geothermal sector. I mean, I started in geothermal about 15, 16 years ago, and one of the things that has carried through all those years is that geothermal is very much a misunderstood and too little published source of energy. And Agora kind of worded this quite nicely here, and it is really true. And the reason for that are naturally many, and I will touch upon a few of those on the way forward. But to start with, kind of in the context of this presentation, the energy transition. And really here, what we talk about this in the energy transition, or Energiewende, as it initially was proclaimed in Germany, is a way towards transforming the energy sector from a fossil-based industry or energy sector to a zero carbon industry. And the goal is to do this as fast as possible. And really the question is, like, what are the energy sources and what are the elements of that transition? And with that, it's an old slide, but I want to share this here because it kind of highlights the importance of certain aspects in the energy discussions. And this is the energy demand of the European Union here from 2013. That's actually a long time ago, but not that much has changed. And it highlights the fact that we are, in all the discussions about the energy transition, are too much targeting and talking about the electricity sector and often forget the other elements as well. We talk about transportation naturally and the electrification of the car fleet. But one aspect that clearly is underrepresented and just newly being targeted widely is the heating and cooling sector, which represents up to 50% of the energy demand in the European Union. Internationally, the picture is very, very similar. And that highlights the fact that this industry is predominantly still building itself up on fossil fuel-based heating and cooling segments. So here the idea is really understanding how can we look at energy sources that can really cover that demand. And that becomes really interesting and really highlights the fact that electricity is not everything. And when we look at the energy transition, naturally we're talking about tapping into renewable energy sources. And I did try to kind of categorize the different renewable energy sources one day. Clearly, this is neither scientific nor probably very correct, but it's an approach to looking how are we utilizing renewable energy sources today, and what are they being used for. And it's really interesting is that, you know, if we look at wind here, wind produces electricity directly through the windmills, which we all know. Solar either transfers, catches the sun rays to heat, transferred to heat, which then basically is being transferred to electricity, or directly with photovoltaic systems. Biomass, the same thing here, either producing heat, which then could be utilized for electricity, heating and cooling, and so on. And it shows the relatively direct role of geothermal energy in the context of renewable energy sources. So geothermal heat can be used directly for cooling with the right technology. It can directly produce electricity, and it is naturally a direct heat source. And then there's this whole notion of storage as well in that context, and I will touch upon this at the very end of my presentation. But it highlights the fact that geothermal is probably the most direct role for particularly the heating and cooling sector, providing kind of like the most efficient use of the energy that we can find. And here a subsurface energy. And with that, naturally, the main message is that geothermal is an energy beyond electricity. And I think this is the crucial aspect of geothermal energy in the energy transition. But I would like to start kind of giving a little bit of an update on the current status of geothermal energy and split that both in power generation and direct use. So power generation, we have the top 10 countries of geothermal power generation here today. This is based on installed geothermal power generation capacity. These are updated figures of yesterday, including a new geothermal plant that came online in Indonesia. And it highlights the fact that we're having here at least 8-9 countries that are directly based in volcanic areas. So here clearly the dominating part of the volcanic areas and the high enthalpy resources. And clearly here Turkey is the exception. And these 10 countries represent a large portion of the total installed geothermal power generation capacity, which stands at 15,660 megawatts today. And if you look at the whole world, the picture looks like this, and it highlights the fact how small the rest of the geothermal countries are in the overall scale for the top countries in the world. And we currently have only 5 1,000 megawatt countries, so countries with an installed capacity of more than 1,000 megawatt. And today these are 28 countries that produce electricity with geothermal. The latest newcomer to the picture is Colombia, which is not part of that chart just yet, but it has just recently installed 2 very small units. And with current development, this picture will change. So we have today about 80 countries that are looking into producing geothermal electricity. And the picture looks like this. If you look at the top 10 countries with ongoing project development, we see that Indonesia, with projects under development or planned, would move past the United States in the coming years. And then the picture will change a bit here. Clearly, Kenya is seeking to double its capacity. New capacity will come online this year. a bit of an unclear situation of further development in Mexico, but clearly there's planned development, further development in New Zealand, etc. So there's definitely a lot of things happening, and particularly Ethiopia will see a huge leap forward with the ongoing project development. But it also highlights the fact that other countries are having geothermal development ambitions, and really a lot of projects are under development and planned. And if we look at how geothermal has developed, I tried to kind of provide here with an overview to see the different waves of how geothermal has developed over the years. And I think one of the most important messages here is that we've seen certain waves of development, and they had to do with naturally with the oil crisis in the late 70s, early 80s, and the corresponding development in the United States and elsewhere in the world, and then different initiatives of pushing geothermal development, particularly around 2006, 2007, then translated in more development 2008, 2009, that we had a financial crisis, things picking up again, and then clearly things kicking in from 2014 going forward. And then we've seen this huge development in 2017, 18, and 19. And naturally, we see a bit of a dip now with regards to COVID and the challenges in the market there. Here, both by decreased electricity demand, but also the challenges of moving equipment and people to build these projects. So where does geothermal move from here? It's hard to say, but but development and ongoing projects probably will see a nearly doubling of the geothermal capacity by 2030. And we believe the development of 2030, 2035 could reach up to 27,000 megawatts. But, and I think we have to be realistic here, it clearly highlights the fact that we are not having the hockey stick growth that we've seen in wind and solar. And that is naturally, can be a concern, but at the same time highlights also that the geothermal sector is maybe not playing that tremendously huge role in the energy transition when it relates to electricity. The development geographically, here's an overview of how things have evolved over the years. It highlights clearly kind of the different spikes that I've mentioned. And it highlights also the move of development from North America, so here the United States and Mexico, towards Asia and the Asia Pacific region and Europe, and Africa, of course, as well. And it highlights kind of really the importance of these markets going into the future. Another aspect that is probably quite interesting is the technologies, and we've seen an increasing shift of the utilization of geothermal energy and the technologies being used for that for power generation. So when in the past dry steam was the predominant source of energy, starting with the Lardorello geothermal plant and further development, double flash and single flash plants, we've clearly seen a trend towards utilizing lower temperature resources, which naturally expands the opportunities for the geothermal sector. And here the technologies that can utilize those lower temperatures for power generation. And we've seen an increase in the utilization of binary cycle technology. And here clearly dominated in the capacity additions from 2015 to 2021 here, highlighted by that chart. The share in the technologies as of the current installed capacity also highlights the increased role of binary cycle technology and the impact it has had. So when it represented about 12% of the power generation technology in 2015, it moved up to 23% in 2020, and we see this share increasing over the coming years. And when I mentioned earlier that the electricity generation sector might not be as an important role globally, it clearly, well, sorry, I was a bit early here. Here again, the difference on the technologies by countries and here clearly highlighting the resource capacities. And here, Turkey, naturally a low temperature resources area, and clearly with binary technology dominating here. Indonesia, a volcanic area with really high temperature resources here, dry steam and flash technology dominant. In the United States, as I said earlier, dry steam and flash technology was dominant, but the development in the last 10, 15 years has been predominantly in lower temperature areas such as Nevada, and here binary technology has increased. As I said, I started earlier, the impact of geothermal for electricity generation internationally and the relatively small role going forward. It still is important to highlight the fact what important role geothermal energy plays in the electricity generation in specific countries. And here an overview that we kind of tried to look at into 2019, highlighting the electricity generation and the share of geothermal in the overall power generation or electricity generated in these countries. And here Kenya by far the country depending most on geothermal. And that is a positive thing. So with the droughts in Africa and Kenya, the dominantly hydropower-based power generation market has seen challenges with the drought and less water. So geothermal really has come in very, very strong, and at times now produces more than 50% of the electricity generated in Kenya. So really an important source of electricity for these countries. In El Salvador here, 29%, Iceland is 27%, or up to 29% actually now. And then the Azore Islands, this is an island group off the coast of Africa belonging to Portugal here. They derive up to 20% of their electricity from geothermal. New Zealand and Nicaragua about 17%, and so on. So it really highlights that it plays an important role in the electricity generation and the electricity generated in these countries. If you look at other countries, Guadeloupe here is another example in the Caribbean, French territory, but even for Guatemala and Mexico, the fact is here that these countries, for these countries, geothermal plays an important role as part of the overall renewable energy capacity fueled into the market. So it highlights the regional role that geothermal can play and support electricity generation and the move to renewable energy resources. And with technology development further, clearly there are opportunities to also replace current fossil fuel-based power generation, but on that I will comment later. If you look at the global geothermal potential, naturally there is a huge untapped potential for geothermal. So when we have today about 16,000 megawatts of installed capacity, with very conservative estimates, and that excludes the really deep and high temperature EGS resources, we have a potential of 150,000 megawatt. And these are resources that are currently being not tapped. So there's a huge opportunity here for further geothermal development. But clearly, when we look at the huge capacity for solar and wind, it will only play a smaller role, but naturally, as I said earlier, important role in certain countries and regions. And with that, I want to kind of move on to the direct use of geothermal resources or direct use of geothermal energy. And here I want to present some data that was shared as part of the World Geothermal Congress data for 2020. And what I did here, I extracted the data without the geo exchange or the heat pumps, the ground source heat pumps, to kind of look into direct use of geothermal resources. So here tapping hot water reservoirs and resources, or water resources. And here naturally the top 10 looks, or the top countries look quite different. China by far the largest country with regards to installed capacity, followed by Turkey, Japan, Iceland, Hungary, and then the other countries. And the capacity today is about double of electricity, so 30,000 megawatts thermal, and clearly an important role. If you look at the annual production here, the picture looks like this. China, Turkey, the picture is very similar, but it highlights an important role that geothermal plays. For what is geothermal energy utilized? So here is the overview, including heat pumps. So heat pumps naturally being used for buildings, both for heating and cooling, and then followed by bathing and swimming, space heating, and so on. And the picture here without the heat pumps looks like this. And it clearly highlights the fact that utilizing the heat of geothermal energy for heating swimming pools and spas and so on plays a dominant role, followed by space heating, greenhouse heating, and industrial uses. But there's also naturally an increasing work on utilizing geothermal energy for fish farming, but also dehydration of food and snow smelting and so on. So clearly here are some of the key elements. And I wanted to kind of like highlight here an element of how direct use of geothermal has changed over the years. And this is data here from 1995 to 2020. And it highlights the different growth achieved by these different utilizations of geothermal energy. And it highlights the tremendous growth of geothermal energy use for space heating. And greenhouse heating here also, and it highlights really the important role that geothermal energy can play in decarbonizing these particular aspects of energy utilization. And if we look at some of the outlook aspects for geothermal energy, and here also in particular direct use, we see an increased look at geothermal for greenhouses. Here for heating and cooling, we are utilizing geothermal energy for greenhouses, not only in, let's say, obvious countries like Iceland and the Netherlands, but also, for example, in Kenya, Turkey, and elsewhere, just because of the opportunity to have a constant temperature in those greenhouses. And here the second picture on the top from the left shows actually how geothermal is being drilled within greenhouse operations here in the Netherlands, a country clearly not an obvious geothermal country, but with a huge greenhouse sector that needs heating, and here a political will and a strong demand for green renewable heat to be utilized for heating. We see an increased co-produced aspect here. So here the combined heat and power plants. Germany is doing a lot of that. Iceland, elsewhere. We're seeing cities like Munich doing a large aspect for geothermal energy, planning to kind of move its complete district heating system to geothermal energy. And the city also bought a number of geothermal power plants in the proximity, so also produces electricity. Food dehydration, naturally in the context of processing food, but also making it more durable, as in particular in the sustainability aspects, an important role and a big opportunity. We see countries like Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, obviously not obvious geothermal countries, utilizing or planning to utilize geothermal energy for heating. We still have Paris, one of the, if you would count this combined, it probably is the largest geothermal district heating. These are just very small, or these are smaller district heating systems, separate systems, but combined probably one of the largest district heating systems in the world. And then we have naturally the huge efforts being made in China. And here, clearly, the political strategy to create smog-free or smoke-free cities, and geothermal being seen as a big opportunity to utilize or to replace coal-fired heating with a clean energy source. And the same can be said in the European Union today. So With the Green Deal, we see an emphasis on targeting any potential renewable energy source for fueling or for covering the energy demand. And the heating aspect and the heating cooling aspect has been recognized by the European Union as a very important aspect in cleaning up the energy sector. And as I highlighted earlier in the categorization of the renewables, geothermal is here not only the obvious choice, but often the only choice. And that's why we're seeing these increased efforts by utilities across Europe to utilize geothermal energy resources, or, as I will kind of touch upon, lower heat found within in the rocks and the subsurface to be carried to utilize through heat exchange systems to replace fossil fuel-based heating. So there's a lot of things happening, and in the direct utilization, and even hydrogen and the heat used there, and the production can also play an important role. But there's another aspect that is increasingly changing the picture for geothermal energy. And a lot of people who know me have heard me talk about this in the past, and particularly in recent months, but is the increasing blurring lines between the different technologies. So when in the past we looked at geothermal purely from a perspective of tapping water-based resources, so hydrothermal resources, and on the one hand of the spectrum, and on the other hand of the spectrum, we had low depth ground source heat pumps, we've seen an increasingly blurring lines in between these technologies. We now have geothermal heat exchange systems that are targeting depths of up to 2,000 meters just to derive higher heat that can make heat exchange system and heat pumps more efficient and thereby produce more energy here in the form of heat or cooling for buildings. We've seen efforts in like here, this is the example of Helsinki in Finland, the combination of all of these technology, including an ultra deep heat exchange system here of a well drilled to 6,000 to 7,000 meters, and just recently announced the approach of utilizing thermal storage as part of the overall concept. So here, not only different technologies, but combining them as an overall picture for the heating future of the city highlights the important role that subsurface energy here and the thermal energy can play. And this will change the picture dramatically for what we define today as geothermal and geo-exchange systems and so on. And we will increasingly see a more development technology-wise, but also in the change of us as an industry. So it's incredibly interesting and important. So what are, let's say, key topics going forward? And naturally, we can talk about electricity, we can talk about heat, but there's a lot of other aspects here as well. Naturally, one topic that has been, on the forefront of news recently has been lithium extraction from geothermal brines or other minerals, for that matter, and the opportunity here purely based on the demand for lithium for batteries and electric cars. A huge opportunity for geothermal. So where not only ongoing or operating geothermal assets can actually create additional resources and revenues from the extraction of minerals from their brine, but we also see increasingly projects that are purely based on lithium that target lithium extraction with geothermal attached to make sure that the lithium extraction remains a clean based lithium extraction, zero carbon lithium, etc. We see an increasing shift in the markets to distributed energy, so smaller scale on-site, utilizing energy resources directly, resilience, etc. Here, for example, I think the good picture are the small ORC units being utilized, for example, in the onsen areas in Beppu and in Japan and elsewhere. We see these efforts being made in Taiwan, Colombia in the co-production from oil exploration here, utilizing hot water from oil extraction. We see an increasing hybrid approach where you utilize solar, for example, either in increasing the heat of the geothermal resource being used on the surface for higher efficiency for the power plant, or solar PV to cover less efficient times of the day, for example, when the heat is very high over midday to kind of fulfill the power purchase agreement, etc. We see the ongoing research on EGS, so engineered or enhanced geothermal systems. Here, the Utah Forge project in the United States, clearly here making groundbreaking research. So if successful, naturally being able to change the market completely. We've seen naturally the closed loop approaches, either the closed loop systems or single well closed loop systems. Drilling technology that is targeting to increase the speed of drilling and decrease the cost of drilling to reach a higher depths, so deeper depths in the sense of targeting supercritical fluids, so really high temperature and thereby more efficient output for geothermal. And it's incredible to see what's happening in that space, as highlighted by the recent Pivot 2021 event that was held, highlighting also the incredible interest by the oil and gas sector in geothermal. And then naturally the really untapped potential for geothermal direct use in all the different aspects of utilizing the heat for all kinds of different things: heat pumps, fish farming, greenhouse, food processing, I mentioned it, power generation, etc. So there's a huge opportunity. But clearly the main growth will happen towards direct use and heating aspects here, and with the technology development, hopefully, we also will see an incredibly upscaling of geothermal energy also for power generation. With that, all that's left for me to leave you with at that stage is to kind of point to the World Geothermal Congress, which we naturally here in Iceland are looking forward to in October this year. Hope most of you kind of had the opportunity to join the virtual event. And naturally, we hope to see as many people as possible here in Reykjavik, Iceland, despite the current challenges that people still face during the pandemic. But I really hope to see a lot of you there. Think GeoEnergy, we are naturally continuing covering the geothermal sector with all the different aspects. You will see an increased coverage of technology aspects that are targeting more heat exchange systems, because that is becoming an increasingly important aspect of our industry. We also see that increasing interest by the oil and gas sector. And so our name, while not being Think Geothermal, was over the years GeoEnergy, and that's where we see also the geothermal energy sector moving more towards a GeoEnergy aspect, an industry covering not only the production of electricity, heat production, but also energy storage, so the storage of heat, and maybe also the further extraction of heat, so making these heat storage systems more effective, etc. And you can follow our activities on LinkedIn, Twitter, naturally, and we also share webinars and presentations on YouTube. And you can follow us at the hashtag or the handle ThinkGeoEnergy. We also have a weekly newsletter that goes out with an update on all the news. So sign up on our website, thinkgeoenergy.com, and I am now looking forward to answer questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this wonderful talk. We have plenty of questions, and how better you could end it by promoting everybody to ask all our audience, please go and visit the website. There you will be also asked to subscribe for the newsletter as well. So get connected with this very impactful news channel and also network building, so collectively we can grow the GeoEnergy contribution in the energy mix. So without any also further ado, now Sebastian, you're up. There are plenty questions, plenty posted. Alex, before asking Sebastian, Do you see us now?
I would have to end the show if that's okay.
Please, yes, of course. Please do so and bring back your browser. So Sebastian, please.
Okay, here I am. Yes.
Excellent.
Great. Also, thank you very much from me, Alex, for great talk and great forward-looking and positive talk about the future of geothermal energy. We literally have countless questions that came on during your talk. So thank you everyone for posting them. And I'm going to start with some of the bigger picture questions, and there's some similar questions. So the first one is from Mohamed Rawai, who I believe joins us from Oman today. Hi, Mohamed. Yes, what are the key elements that will ensure successful, efficient, and sustainable geothermal project?
That could naturally be an hour-long answer, clearly. And if I would have the answer, I probably wouldn't be doing news pieces on geothermal. No, but realistically, as an industry, we're facing key elements in the development. Naturally, one of the main aspects is the risk element. So, and here, how we define risk, how we talk about risk, and how we manage risk are crucial questions. And one of the main aspects of risk in geothermal is that we don't know enough about the subsurface. So about successful project development, one of the most important aspects is the availability of data, either of previous data derived from earlier projects, of wells that have been drilled before, or by general geological data and geophysics data that is available by governments. So governments have a role to play in a sense of making data available, or at least forcing companies that are looking at developing geothermal to make this data available for projects and in the future. Because by that we gain more knowledge about the subsurface and thereby making projects more successful. So that's one aspect. The other aspect naturally is a regulatory framework that highlights the responsibilities of a developer, but also highlights the framework under which a developer can act and develop its projects. That is very crucial. So the regulatory framework is very important. It needs to be strict, but it also needs to provide for the freedom and planning required to develop projects. The environmental aspects naturally fall under that. Clearly, there's a sustainability responsibility of the developer to develop projects responsibly, and that includes not only environmental aspects, but also the engagement of stakeholders and the engagement with the local population and stakeholders, and naturally in the context of for indigenous people, very important to also highlight certain, let's say, religious or cultural aspects of geothermal development. And then naturally, and these are the main framework elements. On the other aspect, I would say is that clearly the technical aspects of understanding that good project management and development requires a good planning, but it also requires to hire the right people. And it's very important that we create the trust within the industry, so you can trust the people that you work with in the development of your projects. And clearly here, industry associations and different groups are providing best practices, approaches, et cetera, that help you find the right players for your project. Technology suppliers, et cetera. But clearly is understanding the resource, the regulatory framework, environmental and stakeholder aspects, and clearly the technical aspects of developing a project. And I think that's roughly it in a very, try to be very short.
Thank you very much. And David Brun commented and said, he agrees the key aspect is geothermal developments legislation. And you mentioned the indigenous communities. And for those who may have not seen the talks by Anna Suzuki and Rosalind Archer, they talked about how people in Japan and the Maori in New Zealand, the importance for them culturally, the geothermal resource have culturally, and how you need to be very sensibly with these cultural concerns. It's much less about the technology technological risk. Geological risk is really about the cultures.
And I think in that aspect, I would like to add one aspect here. And I think, when I tried to highlight in the presentation the different energy sources, there's also an aspect of the economic role that energy source plays locally. And we see this very often is that you have electricity projects like wind or solar, where the local population doesn't get any benefit from these projects. So geothermal provides an opportunity that there are direct employment opportunities and economic opportunities attached to these projects. And I think this is something that we need to really highlight and are an important aspect. And I think a lot of the culture aspects you mentioned, for example, with Rosalind and in the context of New Zealand and Africa, is clearly about how can the local population benefit from project development.
Yeah. You talked about risks, and Charles Du Bois has a question. I'm just trying to find the right one here. And he has great presentation. One barrier mentioned for geothermal is the geological risk. You alluded to this in your answer. Unique to the technology, how should the sector approach overcoming this problem? And I'm thinking of oil and gas, you're offshore, you're in the desert. If something goes wrong, it is a risk, but it doesn't affect you as a community. If you have district heating, if you drill in a city center, something goes wrong, that affects you as a community. And there's some well documented examples. So how do we as a sector need to approach this problem to talk about geological risk, which is very opaque and vague to many people?
So I think there are several aspects here. Naturally, if we talk about seismic risk, are we talking about groundwater contamination? Are we talking about noise? So these are I guess aspects here that are seen as risk in that regard. And as I said, as an industry, the importances are best practices that are important, and naturally part of that can be steered by governments, by the regulatory framework. But for us as an industry, is like we need to understand and learn from mistakes made in the past, and try to kind of not make these mistakes going forward. And I have to be, I guess, one has to be careful not to kind of particular mention specific projects, but I think some of the projects that have been developed are providing fantastic learning lessons for us going forward. And they include that we as an industry need to speak openly about challenges we face in our project development and learn from others how they overcame these challenges and these risks. So we can all learn together as an industry to kind of don't make these mistakes and fall into these traps and with these risks involved.
I'm going to stay on the risks on the technical side. Thank you for the answer for a moment. And Saideep Pavuluri has a slightly longer question, two-part question, and he says, regarding the common geothermal energy is misunderstood that you made, is it because it's also less understood from a scientific point of view, so experimentally, numerically, phenomena such as phase change, reactivity, scaling, tubings, etc. Do we need to incorporate them to understand the performance of a well, to understand the performance of a geothermal well? So how much are we missing in terms of the science?
So I probably in the context of the way how Al Gore mentioned it and the way I kind of perceived it in that context was more the fact that we see geothermal tied in with volcanic activities. So the aspect here that whenever we talk about geothermal, people think immediately of Iceland and volcanics, and basically said, well, in Iceland you only need to put your thumb in the ground and you have geothermal. And the understanding, and we don't have earthquakes, we don't have volcanoes. That's why we don't have geothermal. This is basically the aspect here of the misunderstanding and highlighting the fact that there is geothermal energy everywhere. It's just a way of how we tap it, to what extent, and for what we can use it for. But the point is, like, we have geothermal everywhere, and that is often not understood by politicians. And here, I guess, that's the aspect that we have to promote, that geothermal is everywhere and it can be utilized everywhere. It cannot be utilized as efficiently and directly for power generation and all the aspects of direct use as we do here in Iceland. But as the Netherlands show, as Turkey shows, even with lower heat resources, you can utilize geothermal energy as part of your energy mix. And I think this is the important part. The technical aspects, I think the people that work in there understand. And that's why also I guess what we've seen in the Netherlands, where purely based on heat demand, geothermal has developed, and the technology has developed as part of that.
Thank you. You mentioned geothermal energy is everywhere. It's just the question of how we use it. And two sort of questions related to that comment. And I start with the one from Lewin says, thank you for the lecture. What are the main reasons for the fact that compared to solar and wind energy, geothermal energy still shares a very low portion of the global energy market, considering it is available? Is it just political will that is missing, the misunderstanding of the potential geothermal energy has, or is there something else?
Again, this is probably an answer that will get me into trouble with some people, but I think the main aspect is here that number one, we're talking about a somewhat more complex source of energy, and a source of energy that we constantly ponder upon risks. And I think we as an industry, we are talking too much about the risks. Yes, there are risks, but we can manage them, and we've learned a lot in the process. But naturally, tapping a resources 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 meters deep in the earth to utilize it for energy is more complex than putting up a solar PV panel, or windmills for that matter. And politically, that's the other aspect, is it takes a long time to develop these geothermal projects. So from a political support perspective, we've seen that huge challenge of not getting the political support for geothermal, simply due to the fact that we're not providing the photo opportunity for the politician that decides to support the project. Because the electoral cycles are what they are. And that has been, it's not the main challenge, but it's one of the key challenges of why we have not been able to gather that political support, particularly in recent years where times are way more fast forward moving. There's not much of a long-term view in the aspects. And another aspect I think is that wind and solar have managed to decrease the cost of electricity generation dramatically. And geothermal has not been able to do that, unfortunately, because the drilling cost is still a tremendous cost element of the geothermal part. So the surface part are just like coal-fired plants and other thermal plants, is not to say simple, but it's relatively standard. The subsurface aspect is still kind of the most challenging aspect with regards to cost. And we need to really figure out a way to decrease the cost of geothermal projects and thereby become more competitive. And we have something to sell, so we are an important aspect. So the cost of electricity of geothermal has naturally been a big aspect, but at the same time we are providing also a more valuable source of energy. And I think that hasn't gotten through in the support schemes of governments.
That's really interesting. I think you've sort of answered one of Charles' other questions. I'm just going to bring it up in case there's anything else you want to say. Direct utilization of geothermal has a more diverse customer base, e.g. municipalities, than wind. How should the sector go about making the technology more approachable as an energy solution? Is there anything else? You've given a really great answer there. Is there anything else that we're missing?
I think that is already happening, and the interesting aspect is here is that the direct use utilization of geothermal provides tremendous opportunity for smaller scale development and utilization, not requiring the large infrastructure such as transmission lines, district heating networks, etc. So the smaller scale opportunities providing huge opportunities across. And the problem is particularly when we think of large scale development and scale, and that's naturally particularly what the oil companies are looking for into project development. that's where geothermal, the heating market seems to be incredibly difficult to tackle, because you don't have that big customer. But the positive aspect is that you can actually have one customer that decides to go for geothermal. So you have a customer that's already bought into your project, and that provides an opportunity in itself. And we've seen, I mean, look at the heat pump sector. I mean, this sector basically, has seen a dramatic change in recent years. I mean, Google invested in the sector, looking at different business models of how to make it work. And we see similar things happening for the direct use of geothermal. So there's a lot of things happening that can really change it. Is it still difficult to kind of do larger scale projects? Probably yes, because you probably would go more for direct use, district heating systems for new projects or new areas, buildings being built, or you can replace existing district heating systems, for example, in Eastern Europe, with geothermal. So the opportunities are there. I would disagree that this is that much more challenging. It creates different markets, it creates different companies and business models, but on an overall scale perspective, there's huge opportunity.
Also, I think in terms of one number that's always sort of thrown around is that 50% in Europe and the northern developed countries, roughly 50% of the energy that we use is to keep ourselves warm or cold. So having that, using district heating for that could make a huge contribution to net zero in terms of geothermal direct use.
Incredible. And as I said, I think the combination of these different technologies, just like Helsinki shows, is the interesting part. And I think this is missing in the overall energy debate. There is not one solution. So geothermal will not be the one single solution, but it can play a really important role as in the overall scheme of things. So wind and solar have their role to play. Geothermal, GeoEnergy, because then the storage aspect comes in. Store heat in the summer, utilize the heat in the winter, etc., etc. We have this good example of geothermal being used in car manufacturing in Hungary, or the production of turbines for planes. So there's all kinds of aspects here that are tremendously important. And I think one of the nicest stories, I think, is the COVID vaccine Janssen, which is, the company actually drilled a geothermal well on their premises in Belgium to utilize heat for their production. So it's an exciting side fact, I guess, in today's world.
That's really interesting. I'm going to bring in one question of my own, because it links back to one of the very first talks we had in the webinar series by Michael Stevens, the chief scientist of BGS. He talked about energy corridors in Africa. You mentioned Kenya growing or seeking to double its geothermal potential. Ethiopia, because they sit on a volcanic area. What is the potential in Africa for geothermal energy, considering not just geologically, but also that energy systems, energy networks are sometimes not as mature and as widely developed as, say, in Europe? And one example is always brought up is many of the African countries, we don't have landlines. Everyone uses mobile phones because that technology was mature enough when people became more connected. So is there a big future in Africa, for example, for geothermal energy, not just geologically, but also because the energy market is still developing in some areas?
I mean, we see the interesting aspect in Africa is that there's still a relatively low electrification rate. So a lot of the electricity, the dramatic increase in electricity demand kind of provides for both opportunities and challenges. And naturally, transmission lines are a crucial aspect. But just like you said with mobile phones, we see an increased distribution of energy produced. So smaller scale projects distributed will play an important role. On an industrial aspect, I mean, we see these approaches of creating industrial parks around where energy is being generated, naturally taking away some of the aspects of transmission. So, for example, the industrial park in Olkaria that is connected by rail to the harbor in Mombasa, for example, through Nairobi, is a good example. But I think also from the future, like we will see these larger projects, for example, in Kenya, Ethiopia, but we will also see smaller projects providing for economic development in certain areas that don't necessarily require this large infrastructure. So there are definitely aspects here, and that's where you need geothermal. Well, you need geothermal, but where you don't have geothermal, you utilize sun and wind. So there are. So we have to understand that geothermal, like I said, we will not provide the solution everywhere, but where we have geothermal, we can provide it. We can provide it in scale if the resources are there, but we can also provide it in smaller scale. I mean, good example. I mean, we have in Iceland just recently one of the geothermal hot springs. It's a spa. They just installed a 40 kilowatt power unit to produce their own electricity from the water before it goes into the hot pots, because it's too hot. So they can utilize producing their own electricity. Does it make a huge impact in the energy statistics of Iceland? It doesn't. But does it make an important role there? Absolutely. And so do the 150 kilowatt or 500 kilowatt units in Japan at the onsens. And I think it highlights the fact also what geothermal can play in those different areas. And that then combined with direct use, for example, for milk pasteurization, milk dehydration, food processing, like is done in El Salvador or in Guatemala, where you dehydrate fruit. In that combination, you can utilize geothermal for local production and create all kinds of opportunities. So yes, there is a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity on a smaller scale.
Thank you. I mean, it is really good to see. So here's a positive, uplifting story and the potential that geothermal can have. I want to come back. And time is running fast. We probably could continue the discussion for another hour or two, considering all the questions that we're getting here. Time is running fast. I want to come back to sort of some of the new players, new old investors that have recently popped up. And Kishan Kumar asked a question similar to what a different question from Yuan Wang. Kishan says, in the recent 1 or 2 years, many billionaires, Bezos, Gates, are suddenly investing in geothermal energy. What's the reason behind this, considering geothermal energy is actually quite novel technology? And just sort of relate to this, Yuhang, this Google recently announced, and you alluded to this investment in geothermal energy, also for more sustainable rare mineral extraction. Could geothermal projects also scale up for sustainable mining strategies? Why, in your view, why are some of these outsiders, the Microsofts, the Googles of the world, suddenly investing in geothermal energy?
Well, number one, naturally, they are under increased pressure to source renewable energy, clean power for their operation. So that's clearly one aspect. The other aspect is that naturally they have a lot of money to utilize, and what they know technology, and they know about venture capital, and they know about how to do equity investments in technology development, and basically betting on certain technologies, making the big break. And I think here clearly geothermal is seen as an old technology, but there are certain aspects of geothermal that are clearly seeing revolutionary things being developed that could change the sector quite dramatically, be it closed loop systems, single closed well systems, heat exchange systems, drilling technology. We have this plasma drilling technology being developed, etc. So these are potentially technologies that, if they are successful, can dramatically change the energy market. And that's why these players are predominantly looking into technology plays, because that's a play they know. Unfortunately, so far, they've not been investing in actual development. So they've been targeting this mostly from a technology perspective, or also with a business. I call this business model development. So basically, a business model that tries to revolutionize the way we develop projects by a different business model. So there's been an investment by, for example, Chevron and the group around Bill Gates, for example, here, and Breakthrough Energy Ventures, the name, so they are naturally targeting these things, and I think we will see more of that coming. But we need money for drilling. So there are a lot of projects that need money for drilling, and I think that's where we need to kind of direct more of that investment. But I think that will happen. It's just a matter of time, and there are exciting developments, particularly by players in the oil service sector. Highlighting the fact that they are actually buying into the deal flow, so to speak. So that's definitely some really interesting things happening. So you will read on this on Think GeoEnergy.
I'm going to take, you mentioned the oil and gas sector. I'm going to take one last question here from Richter. The oil and gas sector is naturally equipped with a lot of the necessary technology and probably also the know-how to make geothermal energy available at scale. To what extent do you see them moving into this sector?
That is a really good question. I think a question that many of us have been trying to answer for a long, long time. And I think the answer is that geothermal has so far not been able to provide the scale that the oil and gas sectors have been looking at. So over the past 10, 15 years, whenever the oil companies looked into, or the large oil players looked into geothermal, they always kind of ended up, it's not providing the 1,000 megawatt opportunity. So that has been a big challenge. We've seen now an increasing interest on smaller scale projects. They're more regional, like Shell in the Netherlands, for example, on the heating projects. And we've not seen the big break yet on larger scale projects. But with the technology development and investment, for example, into EGS and closed loop systems, they are trying to tap into that potential of scale. So again, talking about the technology investment, and that if that is successful, and when this is successful, there will be sufficient scale that the oil companies are targeting. So they're targeting this mostly currently from the technology perspective, in the hope that it creates the scale that they need for their work. But I see them coming in sooner in smaller scale projects, and I'm talking smaller, about 50 to 100 megawatts, not much below that. But yeah, you wait and see. There are some things happening. So.
Great, thank you much. I'm going to close with one comment from Sadeep, and I think he speaks for all of us. Thank you for the great talk, Alex. I recently came across Think GeoEnergy, and the site's live with all updates across all corners of the world. Well done, Alex. So on that note, thank you for a really great talk, Alex. Thank you for maintaining Think GeoEnergy, which certainly is a source of knowledge for me, and I followed very regularly. So thank you to our audience for many, many great questions. As I said, could have gone on for another half an hour easily with the discussion. Apologies if I couldn't bring up all the questions that you've asked. Wishing you all a nice afternoon, nice rest of the day, wherever you are. Thank you again, Alex, and Hardy, over to you for some
thanks very much.
Comments.
So I'd like to take the chance, introduce our next week's speaker. We will host Keita Yoshioka from Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, UFZ. Keita will give a talk about fracture initiation and propagation in porous media. So until next week, 5th of August, 2021, stay happy, healthy, and tuned into our channel. Subscribe to get notifications for the upcoming webinars. And we wish you all a very pleasant weekend as well. Thanks a lot, Alex. It was a great talk.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.